Something stirred within the Church, a moment that seems small but carries weight far beyond its appearance. On the surface, it's quiet, almost unremarkable, but beneath, it's shaking the foundations of how the Catholic Church speaks and moves in the world. A name was changed, a speech was delivered, a role was reassigned. On paper, it's routine, a bureaucratic shuffle that barely registers. But for those who understand the language of symbols in the Catholic Church, this was no ordinary act. It was precise, deliberate, strategic. If you listen closely, not just to what was done, but to how it was done, what was said, and, crucially, what was left unsaid, you'll see why this moment could be remembered as a turning point in Pope Leo XIV's pontificate. The media barely noticed. No outrage, no applause, no screaming headlines. Yet inside the Vatican, within theological circles, and especially among those who've watched the Church drift in recent years, there's a different pulse. Something has changed, and not everyone is ready for it. Pope Leo didn't issue a thunderous declaration or publish a sweeping encyclical. He didn't call a press conference or court public attention. He simply replaced one man, Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia, Grand Chancellor of the John Paul II Theological Institute. To most, the title sounds obscure, a niche role in a sprawling institution. But within the Church, this position is no small thing. It's a power center, a place where the Church's voice on life, morality, family, and the human person is shaped, refined, and passed on to future generations. For years, under Paglia's leadership, that institute had been quietly but unmistakably reshaped, steered toward something more open, more modern, more flexible in its approach to doctrine. Paglia drove that shift, nudging the Church's language into alignment with contemporary sensibilities. Now, he's out. No drama, no public conflict, just a replacement. But for those who know the backstory, this wasn't a simple swap. It was a signal, a message sent not through loud words, but through calm, calculated action. A move like this speaks louder than any manifesto, and it says the Church's direction is shifting. Days before the appointment, Pope Leo gave a homily, simple, clear, unadorned. He spoke of unity and love, not as abstract ideals or emotional platitudes, but as truths tethered to tradition, to the unchanging core of the Church's teaching. He didn't position himself as a reformer or promise bold change. He described himself as a servant, a guardian, entrusted with protecting what's been handed down through centuries. That kind of language is rare today, not because it's radical, but because it's too clear. Clarity has consequences. For years, the Church's voice on human life, love, family, and identity has been softening, growing more open-ended, more adaptable to modern pressures. The shift was subtle, unfolding through small changes in tone, slight pivots in emphasis, in classrooms, institutes, and speeches. It shaped how Catholics think, how they teach, how they live. It wasn't always obvious, but it was deliberate. A slow drift toward flexibility, toward dialogue over doctrine. Now, quietly, Pope Leo has stepped into that current and begun to turn it back. This isn't a culture war. It's not a counterattack or a bid for headlines. It's something deeper, a quiet insistence that the Church cannot build clarity on ambiguity, that love doesn't stand against truth, that doctrine isn't the enemy of compassion, that unity requires a foundation rooted in something eternal. That's why this appointment matters. Not because Paglia was a lightning rod or his replacement, Cardinal Aldo Ria is a hardliner, but because this single decision, made so early in Pope Leo's papacy, shows how he plans to lead. Not with noise, not with slogans, but with conviction and calm. Some see it and say it's too soon to judge, that it's just a gesture. But gestures are how the Church speaks. Symbols signal direction. This move, right at the start of his pontificate, doesn't feel random. It feels like a first step, a deliberate marker. What happens next will matter even more. But this moment has already changed the tone inside the Vatican. People are paying attention, some with hope, some with concern, but no one's ignoring it. This is how change begins in the Church, not through chaos or spectacle, but through quiet, purposeful acts. The question isn't just what Pope Leo will do next. The deeper question is what this means for the Church's path forward, and who's ready for the direction he's pointing toward. Stay with us, because in the next part, we're going to unpack exactly what happened under Paglia's leadership, how the John Paul II Institute was transformed, and why undoing that transformation could reshape the Church's moral voice for generations to come. They called it a routine adjustment. That's how the headlines framed it. One bishop steps aside, another steps in. It didn't trend on social media, didn't make the evening news. Catholic media gave it a paragraph, maybe two, the kind of story you scroll past if you don't know the names. Archbishop Paglia was replaced as Chancellor of the John Paul II Institute, the reports noted, before moving on to a Vatican photo op or some diplomatic moment. No urgency, no explanation, just another clerical change in a church full of them. Even within the Church, the reaction was muted. Some took note, others barely registered it. A few insiders raised their eyebrows, but there were no fiery statements, no immediate controversy, just a quiet swap of roles on an unremarkable afternoon. That's what makes this moment so intriguing. In a church that often speaks through silence, where decisions are wrapped in layers of tradition, precedent, and symbolism, a move like this carries more meaning than a press release ever could. Most people missed it, conditioned by years of similar-looking appointments that changed little. By language so cautious and polished, it feels designed to say everything and nothing at once. That's why this slipped by almost unnoticed. The surface story was neat, professional, perfectly ordinary. But it's the kind of ordinary that only looks flat until you know where to dig. If you ask the average Catholic in the pew what the John Paul II Institute is, they might struggle to answer. They might guess it's an academic center, a theology school, and they'd be technically right. But it's far more than that. It was created to be a pillar, an anchor for the Church's moral and anthropological voice in a rapidly changing world. For decades, it helped define how the Church taught about family, sexuality, bioethics, and the dignity of the human person. Its purpose wasn't just intellectual, it was spiritual, pastoral, deeply formative. It trained priests, theologians, and lay leaders to carry the Church's vision of the human person into the modern age. Over time, though, it became a quiet battleground, not in an explosive way, but through a slow, subtle reshaping of what it meant to speak clearly about moral truth. That reshaping began in earnest around 2016, under Paglia's leadership. The Institute started to pivot, not with dramatic overhauls, but through soft, incremental adjustments. Long-standing professors, known for their fidelity to traditional Catholic moral theology, were replaced or sidelined. New voices, scholars with backgrounds in anthropology, psychology, and sociology, were brought in, bringing more fluid interpretations of doctrine. The language shifted. Traditional frameworks were no longer the default. Instead, there was space for exploratory approaches. Key terms like marriage, human dignity, and morality were redefined, or at least reframed, to align with modern questions and sensibilities. The curriculum expanded, not just in content but in direction. leaning into dialogue over doctrine, pastoral sensitivity over moral clarity. This shift was subtle, often packaged as renewal, as a way to make the Church more relevant, more compassionate, more engaged with the complexities of the modern world. To those paying attention, though, it felt like the ground was moving. Paglia's leadership wasn't about outright rejection of church teaching, but about softening its edges, making it more malleable, more open to reinterpretation. His public statements reflected this. Comments on euthanasia, for instance, emphasized accompaniment and dignity, but left questions about moral absolutes unanswered. Was it nuance or ambiguity? That question became a hallmark of his tenure. For a while, it was tolerated, even praised, as part of a broader push within the Church to prioritize mercy over rules, dialogue over declarations. But over time, tolerance gave way to tension. The Institute, founded by John Paul II to guard the Church's teaching on the human person, seemed to be drifting from that mission. None of this made front-page news. The Church rarely does, unless scandal or politics erupt. So these changes stayed within academic and ecclesial circles, debated in journals, murmured at conferences, whispered in seminaries. But their impact was profound. When you shape how future priests, bishops, and Catholic thinkers understand the human person, you're not just changing an institution. You're changing the future of how the Church speaks to the world. This is the context most people don't see, and it's why Pope Leo's decision hit harder than it appeared. On the surface, it was a standard handoff. One bishop out, another in. The press offered clean write-ups, no real commentary, just diplomatic neutrality. Paglia completed his service. Ria was well regarded. End of story. But that's just the language of protocol. What really happened was the quiet end of one chapter and the start of another, with a distinctly different tone. Yet few said it out loud. That silence lingers, not the event itself, but the absence of noise around it. Not many asked why this change came so early in Pope Leo's pontificate, why the John Paul II Institute mattered so much, or why it had drifted so far from its original purpose. The response was muted, not hostile, not excited, just quiet. That's strange, because when a foundation is quietly removed and replaced, it's supposed to mean something. So why wasn't it louder? The answer is as unsettling as the move itself. It wasn't louder because nobody wanted to look too closely. Not yet, not this soon, into a new papacy. The surface story was comfortable, easy to move past. But now, as days pass and attention shifts elsewhere, more people are starting to ask, what just happened? What does it mean? Why now? This doesn't feel random. It feels like the beginning of something. A shift not just in personnel, but in identity. Beneath the calm press statements and polite transitions, this could be about the Church's soul, what she teaches, what she's willing to defend, and who she trusts to shape her future. That's not a ceremony or a formality. It's the heart of everything. Pope Leo didn't need to say it directly. That's the thing about the Church's language. Its power lies not just in words, but in how they're chosen, when they're spoken, and what they echo. In his homily, surrounded by centuries of stone and liturgy, he spoke softly, but the quiet wasn't emptiness. It was control, precision. Every phrase was deliberate, every term rooted. He spoke of love, not as open-ended acceptance or emotional license, but as fidelity, tied directly to truth, to tradition. He framed unity not as tolerance for divergence, but as communion in the faith handed down. That framework has been dormant in papal rhetoric for years, not gone, but softened, diluted, buried under modern phrasing. Pope Leo didn't bury it. He brought it back, calmly, as if it had never left. The appointment itself carries the same weight. Cardinal Aldo Ria isn't a celebrity or a provocateur. He's not known for buzzwords or charisma. What he's known for is consistency, theological clarity, a pastoral depth that doesn't seek to impress but to hold fast. That's not the kind of appointment you make if you want to preserve a big tent where every viewpoint is welcome. It's the kind you make when you want to draw lines again, even if quietly. It's who you choose when you're more concerned with guarding what exists than exploring new interpretations. This isn't about launching a campaign, it's about building a foundation. And that's what makes this moment so compelling. It's not just about who was replaced, but about what the replacement signals. The John Paul II Institute, under Paglia, had become a symbol, not officially, but to insiders, of a place where boundaries were tested, softened, where new ideas were introduced under the banner of pastoral concern. That Pope Leo chose this moment, this seat of influence, for his first major move isn't a coincidence. It's a message, a targeted one, spoken not in words, but in action. The symbolism is the statement. The decision is the sentence. And for those who understand how the Vatican communicates, through symbols, appointments, silences, it says more than any encyclical could. Stay with us, because next we'll dive deeper into Paglia's tenure, the Institute's transformation, and why this quiet act could reshape the Church's voice for decades. This isn't just about a title or a role. It's about the soul of the Church, and what Pope Leo's early moves reveal about where he's leading her.